In a world obsessed with efficiency, one woman's silence becomes her revolution. When a veteran employee is forced out by deceitful colleagues, her absence exposes the soul of a company built on arrogance and the power of one voice that refused to fade quietly. The office was too quiet for a Friday evening, the kind of silence that buzzes like an unspoken accusation. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flickering over rows of empty desks, except for one where Lily sat, her hands motionless above the keyboard. The cursor blinked on the screen, waiting for her to type her final report, but her mind wasn't on the numbers anymore. Her resignation letter sat folded neatly beside her mouse, the company logo staring back at her like an old friend she was about to abandon. For 37 years, this building had been her second home. She had watched it change paint, people, and presidents, but tonight, it felt foreign, as if it had already forgotten her name. She could still hear Tom's voice from earlier that day, sharp and metallic. "It's about efficiency, Lily. We need to evolve." Behind him, Emily had smirked, her crimson lips curving like a paper cut. Lily hadn't replied. She didn't need to. Her silence, practiced and steady, had always been her armor. But now that armor felt too heavy. The clock ticked toward 8:17 p.m. Everyone had gone home, even the janitor. She was the last ghost of an older era, still filing tax declarations and cross-checking invoices no one else cared to understand. On the wall near her desk, a faded photo showed the old team from 20 years ago, smiling faces, framed certificates, camaraderie that had long since decayed. Back then, work had meant purpose. Now it was politics disguised as progress. Her phone buzzed. A message from Emily. "Don't forget to hand in your key card before you leave." Protocol. "No, thank you, no goodbye." Lily exhaled through her nose and placed the card beside the letter. She stared at the two access and departure, side by side like twin endings. A distant thunder rolled outside the window, the kind that promised rain but not relief. She reached for her thermos, took a sip of cold coffee, and let the bitterness settle on her tongue. Somewhere deep inside her chest, a quiet ache expanded. It wasn't just exhaustion, it was the slow heartbreak of being replaced not because you failed, but because you made others uncomfortable with your quiet competence. The intercom clicked. "Lily, can you come to the president's office?" The voice was young, uncertain. She hesitated. She had already said her piece that morning, handed in her notice, thanked him for the years, smiled politely as he nodded distractedly. Why no? She gathered her folder and walked down the long corridor. Her footsteps echoed softly against the polished floor. As she passed the accounting department, she noticed Tom's desk, a mess of coffee cups and unopened mail. Emily's perfume still lingered in the air, too sweet, too loud. The scent of ambition. When Lily entered the president's office, two figures were already waiting, Tom and Emily, side by side, their expressions carved in smug satisfaction. The president, barely in his 30s, leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his voice clipped. "Lily," he said, "we need to clarify a few things before your resignation is processed." His tone was polite, but the room's temperature had dropped. Lily met his gaze, calm and unwavering. She had been through audits fiercer than this. Yet something in his eyes made her pulse quicken, a glint of confusion, almost fear. "Who exactly are you?" he asked suddenly. The words struck her like a slap. For a moment, she thought she misheard. "Who exactly are you?" After nearly 4 decades of service, after hundreds of clients and late nights, that was the question she got. She almost laughed. The absurdity of it tightened her throat. "I'm Lily Johnson," she said evenly. 59. Hired in 88. I built this department before either of them finished high school. Her voice didn't tremble, but her heart did. The president blinked, unsure how to respond. Tom and Emily exchanged glances, a flicker of unease beneath their polished facades. Lily could feel the storm outside pressing against the glass, mirroring the one gathering inside her. For the first time, she realized the silence wasn't peace, it was erasure. And tonight, she would no longer let herself fade quietly from the picture. The rain had started by the time Lily left the president's office, drumming against the windows like a warning she hadn't yet learned to heed. And as she walked back to her desk, the fluorescent lights seemed harsher, revealing every wrinkle, every fatigue line carved by years of staying late for people who no longer remembered her name. The echo of the question, "Who exactly are you?" replayed in her mind like a broken record, slicing through her composure with quiet cruelty, and though she kept her back straight, inside she was unraveling, decades of loyalty condensed into one absurd moment of invisibility. She sat down, staring at the resignation letter once more, her reflection faintly visible in the dark monitor before her. The office that had once felt alive with chatter and shared deadlines now seemed like a graveyard of discarded voices. Her colleagues had grown younger every year, the culture faster, leaner, meaner, efficiency worshipped above all else. Tom, she thought, had changed completely since his promotion, once eager to learn from her, now intoxicated by the authority of his new title. She remembered his clipped tone, the way he'd lean over her desk pretending to check her spreadsheets while actually checking if she'd still obey. And Emily, sharp, ambitious, and careless, laughed too easily at Tom's cruel jokes, mistaking cruelty for charisma. The two of them had built a quiet alliance, a whisper network of mockery that spread like static across the office. The others pretended not to hear, but everyone did. The new management loved Tom's modern energy, unaware that most of his reports were stitched together from her templates. Lily could endure criticism, but not deceit disguised as progress. Still, she had stayed, out of habit, out of duty, perhaps out of fear that leaving would mean all her years had amounted to nothing. But now, as the storm intensified outside, something in her steadiness began to shift, a realization that her silence had not protected her, it had erased her. A loud crash startled her. A stack of files had slipped from the cabinet beside her desk, and as she bent to gather them, she saw the names on the folders, clients she had personally cultivated, accounts that had sustained the company through lean years. Among them, one bore Tom's signature, though the work inside was entirely hers. A faint tremor of anger passed through her fingers as she stacked the papers again, her breath shallow. The office lights dimmed slightly as the storm tripped the power, leaving everything in a gray half-light, and in that moment, she saw her life reflected back, loyal but sidelined, capable but silenced. She stood, slowly, her knees protesting, and looked out the window at the rain-slick city. Cars moved like silver fish below. Somewhere in the darkened reflection, her own face looked older, but not weaker. She whispered to it, "They think I'm gone already." Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "Let's prove them wrong." The next morning, the storm had passed, but the air inside the office felt heavier than ever, as if the building itself remembered what had happened the night before. Lily walked in early, an old habit she couldn't shake, and found a stack of new folders waiting on her desk, urgent, all marked with Tom's initials, yet containing work clearly meant for her. Her pulse tightened. They weren't just overloading her, they were burying her. As she leafed through the files, her phone vibrated with a new message, "Need these done by end of day. No overtime. Tom." A strange calm washed over her then, almost frightening in its clarity. For years she had accepted the quiet indignities of corporate politics, the ignored ideas, the condescending smiles, the silent endurance, but this message felt like a final insult delivered to a woman they believed would never fight back. Her hand trembled slightly as she picked up her pen, but instead of signing the documents, she drew a slow, deliberate line through each page, as if crossing out the years of unspoken obedience. Around her, the office began to fill, Emily's laugh cutting through the hum of computers, Tom's voice booming orders from his glass-walled corner, but Lily didn't look up. She opened her email, drafted a message to the president, and attached copies of the client folders, annotated meticulously with her own handwriting, work reassigned without authorization. Overtime denied. Deliverables completed under duress. She hesitated before pressing send, her heart thudding like it used to before big audits, then clicked. The whoosh of the email leaving her outbox felt louder than any applause she had ever earned. Minutes later, she heard footsteps approaching, Tom's heavy stride, followed by Emily's click of heels. "Lily," Tom said, voice deceptively friendly, "I asked for those files, not a report." She looked up slowly, her gaze unwavering. "You'll get what's yours," she replied, "and I'll keep what's mine." For a second, he faltered, caught off guard by the defiance in her tone. Emily shifted nervously beside him, sensing the change. The silence that followed was electric, the kind that precedes either ruin or revelation. And for the first time in years, Lily didn't feel small. She felt dangerous. The ripple of Lily's defiance spread faster than she imagined. By noon, whispers curled through the office like cigarette smoke. Her email had reached not only the president, but the board itself, forwarded, copied, dissected. From her desk, she could feel the tension in the air, a collective holding of breath as everyone waited to see how the quiet woman who never raised her voice had suddenly become the center of gravity. Tom stormed past her workspace, his usual smugness replaced by a tight-lipped fury. "You think you're clever?" he hissed under his breath, leaning close enough for her to smell the bitter tang of his coffee. "You've just ended your career." Lily didn't flinch. She had no career left to lose, only dignity, and that was no longer negotiable. "If integrity ends a career," she said softly, "then I suppose I should have quit years ago." Tom's jaw twitched, his composure cracking. Emily, lingering behind him, shot Lily a glare that trembled at the edges, her confidence now slightly fractured. For the rest of the day, the office became a stage of stolen glances and muttered conjecture, a theater of hierarchy trembling under its own hypocrisy. By evening, Lily received an unexpected call from the president's assistant. "The president wants to see you immediately." Her chest tightened. She gathered her files and walked the same long corridor again, every step echoing with the memory of last night's humiliation. But this time, something was different. People didn't look past her. They looked at her. In the president's office, Tom and Emily were already seated, their expressions carefully arranged, but betraying a flicker of fear. The young president stood by the window, back turned, the skyline reflected on the glass like a split between light and shadow. When he finally spoke, his voice was taut. "Your email caused quite a stir, Lily. The board wants answers." She nodded, steady. "Then I'll give them truth." Tom scoffed, his nerves disguised as arrogance. "Truth? You mean your version of it?" She turned toward him, her gaze unblinking. "No, Tom. The kind written in your handwriting on documents I completed for you. The kind that's been sitting quietly in audit logs you thought no one read." A thin line of sweat appeared near his temple. Emily shifted uneasily, color draining from her face. The president looked between them, suspicion slowly coalescing into comprehension. "Is this true?" he demanded. Tom opened his mouth, but the words tangled in his throat. Emily tried to interject, her voice faltering. "Sir, Lily's exaggerating. She's upset." Lily repeated, and her voice, though calm, carried the weight of decades. "Yes, I am upset. I'm upset that loyalty became a liability. I'm upset that diligence is treated like defiance. And I'm upset that after 37 years, my worth can be questioned by those who haven't lasted 3. The room went silent except for the faint hum of rain starting again outside. The president sat down slowly, rubbing his temples, the reality of corporate decay settling heavily between them. Tom looked down at his hands, realizing the scaffolding of lies he'd built was beginning to collapse. Emily's eyes glistened, not with remorse, but fear, the fear of being caught, of losing the fragile privilege she'd mistaken for power. Lily stood taller, her voice soft but resonant. "You asked who I am," she said to the president. "I'm the person who kept your clients from leaving when the market crashed, who fixed your tax reports at midnight, who trained the people now trying to erase me. That's who I am." For a moment, no one moved. Then the president leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Then maybe," he murmured, "it's time we start remembering what kind of company we want to be." The storm outside grew louder, wind rattling the glass, as if the world itself was holding its breath for what would come next. The boardroom was unnaturally still, the kind of stillness that arrives right before something breaks, and Lily could feel the weight of every gaze in the room pressing down on her as the president motioned for her to sit. The blinds were half drawn, slicing the sunlight into sharp, sterile lines across the polished table where documents lay scattered like evidence at a crime scene, and for the first time in years, Lily felt that the company she had devoted her life to had turned into a courtroom, one where truth had no allies. Tom and Emily sat opposite her, pale and trembling beneath their carefully curated professionalism, the storm that had been building for months finally collapsing around them. The president began quietly, almost gently, "I had the audit team review your claims." The pause stretched unbearable. They found inconsistencies. Large ones. Tom's throat bobbed, the sound of his denial catching before it could form words. "Your signatures on unpaid overtime reports," the president continued, voice hardening. "Client accounts reassigned without approval. Expense claims for dinners labeled consultations." He tossed a few sheets across the table, receipts, annotated files, timestamps, and the flutter of paper sounded like a verdict. Emily's hand went to her mouth, her eyes wide with the realization that the very machine she'd helped Tom build was now turning on them. Lily didn't move. She didn't gloat. She simply watched as the facade cracked, as Tom's composure disintegrated into panic. "You don't understand," he stammered. "We did what was necessary. She was slowing us down, slowing you down," the president interrupted, his tone sharp. "She's the reason this department still has clients." The words hung in the air, shocking even him with their finality. Emily started to cry silently, mascara bleeding into dark smudges beneath her eyes, the sound barely audible over the hum of the air conditioner. Tom slammed his hand on the table, anger returning as a last refuge. "She's manipulating you," he shouted, pointing at Lily. "She's playing the victim." Lily looked at him, her gaze steady, unflinching. "If telling the truth makes me a victim, then maybe this company deserves no heroes," she said. The room fell silent again, but this silence was different. It had gravity. It drew every person in the room toward the quiet dignity of a woman who had finally chosen herself over the illusion of loyalty. The president leaned forward, folding his hands. "Tom, Emily," he said, the calm in his tone now deadly, "you're both suspended effective immediately pending termination review." The words were surgical, precise, and final. Tom's chair scraped violently against the floor as he stood, face twisted with rage, but there was nowhere left to direct it. Emily covered her face, shaking. Lily closed her eyes briefly, not in triumph, but in release, a slow exhale of years she didn't realize she'd been holding. As the two were escorted out, she gathered her papers quietly, her movements deliberate, like someone leaving a church after confession. The president turned to her, guilt etched in his young features. "Lily, I can't undo what they did. But if you're willing, I want you back. We need people like you." She looked at him for a long moment, then at the rain outside streaking against the glass. The city glowed with its indifferent rhythm, cars, lights, life continuing as always. "No," she said finally, her voice almost kind. "You don't need me. You need to remember what I stood for." She left the room without another word, her figure small against the vast corridor, yet somehow larger than life, a silhouette walking away not from failure, but from the wreckage of everything that had tried to define her. And as the doors closed behind her, the company, for the first time in years, fell completely silent, not from fear, but from the echo of her absence. 2 weeks later, the rhythm of Lily's days had changed entirely. No alarm set before dawn. No endless meetings about efficiency metrics, no polite nods exchanged in hallways lined with fluorescent ghosts. She woke to sunlight now, not to the mechanical hum of office life, and her first thought each morning was not dread but quiet wonder. Her apartment was small, but alive. The window plants she'd once neglected now thrived. The smell of coffee replaced the sterile tang of printer ink, and the world outside her glass seemed less like something to survive and more like something to rediscover. Yet even as peace settled into her bones, traces of the old ache lingered. the muscle memory of decades spent serving others who never saw her fully. Sometimes, as she stirred sugar into her cup, she could almost hear Tom's voice echoing through the past, condescending, clipped, hollow, and then she'd smile faintly, not out of bitterness, but out of recognition that those echoes no longer belonged to her. They were artifacts, and she was no longer their keeper. One morning, she took the train to a quiet neighborhood near the edge of the city, where her friend Hannah ran a small tax office. The space was modest, 2 desks, a coffee machine that wheezed like an old man, but it breathed differently. There were no hierarchies here, no endless ladders to climb, only people working side by side. "You're really sure about this?" Hannah asked, handing her a spare key. Lily smiled, feeling something light flicker inside her chest. "I've never been more sure." That day, she filed her first independent declaration, not for a corporation, but for a small bakery that paid her in gratitude and éclairs. She stayed late, not because anyone asked her to, but because she wanted to. The numbers, once tools of control, had become her language of integrity again, each line of data an act of quiet rebellion. In the weeks that followed, rumors reached her through former colleagues. Tom and Emily had been terminated formally. Their affair exposed, their reputations evaporated faster than the paper trails they'd tried to bury. There was no joy in it, only a sense of poetic inevitability. Justice, she realized, rarely arrives with applause. It arrives in silence, in balance restored. The president had sent her an email, apologetic yet hopeful, asking if she'd consider returning in an advisory role. She never replied. Some stories, she knew, aren't meant to be repeated, they're meant to end where dignity begins. Instead, she printed the email, folded it neatly, and tucked it into a drawer, not as a memento of power, but as proof that sometimes walking away is the loudest way to be heard. One evening, as the sky blushed with sunset, Lily stood at the window of her new office, her own now, painted soft ivory, smelling faintly of lavender and ink. Outside, the city pulsed with noise and neon, but in her reflection, she saw only calm. Her hands, once trembling from exhaustion, now rested steady on the sill. She whispered softly to the fading light, "You asked who I am. I think I finally know." Her words floated out into the dusk, dissolving into the hum of life below, but in that moment, they carried the weight of liberation, the story of a woman who refused to disappear quietly. And as the first stars appeared, Lily turned off the light, locked the door, and walked into the night with the quiet authority of someone who had rewritten not just her ending, but herself. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional short stories that celebrate resilience, dignity, and redemption. Comment below, what would you have done if you were Lily? Your thoughts could inspire the next story we bring to life.